Hello YouTubers, this is Mark, and today we are celebrating the 60th anniversary with another video for Gamera. And I have written a massive speech to celebrate his 60th, and it's called Gamera, Daiei and Kadokawa's King of the Monsters, a hero to children, and Japan's underrated and underappreciated kaiju, celebrating 60 years of Turtle Power by Mark Redburn. Now, this is a pretty big speech, as I have, I think, over like many I've done many pages of this, so I'm going to split it up into different parts. So, are you ready? Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and fellow fans of kaiju, 10 years ago we celebrated the 50th anniversary of Gamera and his legacy. And now here we are, 10 years later, we are celebrating his 60th. My, does time fly, just like Gamera when he blasts off into the skies via jet propulsion. I still remember as a kid owning Gamera movies on VHS back in the day. Some days I would even watch a Godzilla movie and a Gamera movie back to back, so I would be having hours of kaiju-sized entertainment of Godzilla and Gamera, Japan's two big G's. Good times they were. Good times. I have always loved Godzilla and Gamera equally. I enjoy their movies, and even though Godzilla and Gamera are both made in Japan, their movies have a different feel to them, even though both of them are kaiju movies. And just like Godzilla, Gamera started out as a destructive creature, unleashing his wrath on humanity for their arrogance towards nature, along with mankind's careless use of atomic weapons. And, just like Godzilla, Gamera would become a superhero, defending humanity from either giant monsters or aliens that have come to destroy planet Earth. Godzilla's movies, as well as Gamera's movies, have a different feel and tone that sets them apart, and that is what makes them special. They both have different feel and tone to it. I love both Godzilla and Gamera. I think they are both awesome. And although one is a giant dinosaur and the other one is a turtle, Godzilla and Gamera are respectively both special and unique. And that makes Godzilla and Gamera both kings of the monsters in their own right. And they have both given us messages over the years and taught us valuable lessons in life, whether warning us about the dangers of misuse of science and technology, or looking after planet Earth along with nature and striving to make the world a better place. Godzilla and Gamera, especially Gamera, have both earned their pop culture status, and both have become well known and loved by millions and millions of fans across the globe for decades. But things haven't always been easy for Gamera, and this is where Gamera's story begins. Gamera's debut film came out during the 1960s, the golden age of Japanese monster movies, and all the while Godzilla was Toho's true monster, bringing joy and delight and inspiring a nation. And that's when Daiei Studios entered the picture. Unfortunately, Daiei was in serious trouble after production of their own monster movie was shut down, and they needed a new movie fast. I will go into a bit more detail on that later. The situation with the cancellation of the monster movie left the higher-ups of Daiei with a sour taste in their mouth towards monster movies. But there was one director who was not willing to give up, a man who had a dream to make a movie monster of his own. That man was Noriyuki Yuasa. The studio executives chose him to direct the film, but despite Yuasa's enthusiasm and passion, the higher-ups had low expectations for Gamera, and they felt Gamera would end up being a disaster for Daiei and put an end to not only the studio, but also Noriaki's career as well. Yuasa's career was on the line, and if the film failed, he would fail, and his career would crash and burn. But they went ahead and greenlit the project anyway. And despite the low budget and tight schedule, along with the fact Yuasa had to deal with faulty props and outdated equipment, along with the fact that he was facing belittlement from his colleagues, thinking that why would you go ahead and make this film anyway? But Noriaki Yuasa was determined to bring Gamera to life and use whatever resources he could muster to make his very own dream monster movie come true. I bet Gamera would have been very proud of Noriaki's passion and sheer determination to bring Gamera himself to kaiju-sized life. But the question now is, once the movie is finished and ready for release, how will the audiences respond to Gamera? At that time, Toho was making not just the Godzilla film series, but many others. You've had the War of the Gargantuas, then there was Mothra that came out in 1961, and also you've had Subaru Productions hard at work on Ultra Q as well as Ultraman. So that's the big question. Were the audiences ready for another movie monster? Well, that's the question. And the big question is, will Noriaki Yuasa's Gamera succeed or fail at the box office? Will Gamera himself shine, or will he fade into obscurity? Only time will tell on the 27th of November, 1965. And then came opening night for Gamera's debut. Noriaki Yuasa had high hopes, along with Gamera himself, and of course, the higher-ups at Daiei. Noriaki had put his passion and love into making his own monster movie for Daiei, along with putting his reputation on the line. And because of Daiei's financial situation, many filmmakers derided the film before its release as cheap, and some went and say it's a monster movie that's doomed to fail. But nobody was going to stop Gamera, nor the people at Daiei, nor the director Yuasa himself, because serendipity smiled upon Yuasa and Gamera himself. Gamera, the kaiju underdog, had beaten the odds, and his debut film was a kaiju-sized hit at the box office. Gamera became a star, a celebrity. Audiences fell in love with the huge fire-breathing, jet-propelled hero in a shell. Gamera had launched himself into fame and saved not only Daiei, but Noriaki's career. The future was looking bright for our saber-toothed turtle. I can imagine Godzilla would be there on opening night, shaking Gamera's hand and congratulating him on his success, as well as wishing him all the best in the future. In that moment afterwards, Daiei had their very own Monstar to bring joy and wonder to Japanese audiences. And not long after, a sequel had been given a green light. In 1966, Gamera would return in Gamera vs. Barugon, where our hero in a shell battles his first kaiju opponent, a giant lizard that breathes ice from the tip of its tongue freezing anything it touches, as well as firing a deadly rainbow out from his back. And after 1966's Gamera vs. Barugon, Gamera would encounter his arch-nemesis in 1967, the Shadow of Evil, Gauss, who started out as a giant vampire bat that could fire out supersonic rays that could cut through anything. And from that day on, Gauss, just like King Ghidorah is an arch-nemesis to Godzilla, Gauss was an arch-nemesis to Gamera, and Gauss would return in later future films. With the success of the movies, Gamera was riding on the waves of fame and was becoming popular with children. His films were a huge hit, and because of the success of the 3 films, 4 more movies would be released by Daiei, where Gamera continued his fight for peace and justice against giant monsters or aliens. In 1968, you had Gamera vs. Virus. In 1969, you had Gamera vs. Guiron. In 1970, Gamera vs. Jiger. And 1971, Gamera vs. Zigra. Gamera, along with Godzilla, dominated the movie screens across Japan. So everything was going awesome. But by the 1970s, things beyond their control began to take shape like a dark and stormy cloud. Daiei, by the early 1970s, was having serious financial difficulties, dealing with things like an industry-wide decline in attendance as well as shrinking budgets. Daiei tried to stay alive, but also keep Gamera alive. But sadly, not long after Gamera vs. Zigra was released on the 17th of July in 1971, Daiei went bankrupt in December of that year. It was a bitter blow for poor Gamera. I feel really sorry for him. If Daiei hadn't gone bankrupt, I bet Gamera would have had more movies, but sadly things don't go the way we want them to go. Gamera was absent from the movie screens for 9 years, while Godzilla continued until Toho put the series on hiatus in 1975. Eventually, Gamera would return in 1980's Gamera the Super Monster in an attempt to revive the Gamera series. While Gamera himself is awesome, we love Gamera, but his movie failed at the box office and was nothing more but just riddled with stock footage from his previous films and was an unsatisfying hurrah for the giant turtle. But Gamera was not going to give up. Gamera was not going to walk away from the cinemas and the spotlight, and he was not going to walk away from his fans. There were still people out there that were hoping that even for a miracle that one day he will return once again. And that's the first part, so stay tuned for part 2 of Gamera, Kadokawa and Daiei's King of the Monsters and Japan's underrated and underappreciated kaiju.